Yo, what's up, guys?
Wonderful. It's great to have you both on again. It's been a minute, but it's awesome to see both of you at the same time.
Word.
Okay. So I'm just going to get right into it because I'm in the learning mood. I want to throw you guys a whole bunch of stuff, and let's just start with the bigger question. 10,000 world religions. You're making a claim that Christianity is the right one, and that's where it's at. How do you guys, and Tim, we'll just start with you. How do you whittle that down to one? I want to hear Tim first, then go at it, and then we can just all talk, and then I have more on that. So 10,000 down to one, Tim, how do you start?
Yeah, well, every major discussion or debate I've had publicly with an atheist begins this way. They think it's a strong foot to set out on, and I say, I agree, it's a strong foot for a Christian to set out on. The truth claims held by atheists about religionists are they involve more than the average atheist or agnostic knows. So I just say you have to either believe in zero God, one God, or multi-God. And usually an atheist will assume, 10,000 world religions or something. I say, you're right. There's for every serious Christian or even Jew or Muslim, but we'll leave that to the side, there is some basic properties. Edith Hamilton talks about this with regard to the Greek gods that co-attend anything that's truly a deity. It has to be all-powerful, all-spatial, all-knowing. There are several other omnis, omnipotent, omniscient, omnispatial. Right off the bat, take 9,997 of those world faiths, all but three is the point, and say they don't qualify. All the world's polytheisms, Islam, Hinduism, not Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, whatever, and they don't qualify. They're worldviews, but they're not true religions insofar as they run into the Greek gods problem. You can't have a god that's all-powerful like Zeus if his wife Hera is gumming up the works, the Greek gods problem. So not truly a god. So we're automatically down to three, and they are all of the three religions that at least reputedly began with Abraham, Father Abraham. So that's at least a good starter. I'm glad you led there.
Okay. So Jay, let's take it to you. What would you add or subtract to that?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything Tim said. The only thing I would say is that when I'm debating an atheist, I tend to always prefer the transcendental argument because even though it's kind of complex, it takes a little bit of fleshing out to really hammer it home. Ultimately, if you follow through with it, it kind of demonstrates that Trinitarian Christian theology is the only way to have a consistent, coherent, grounded metaphysic, epistemology, and ethic. And so those three elements that make up a worldview, everybody has a worldview, whether they know it or not. Even if they don't know about philosophy or care about it, they all have some basic set of commitments in those three domains, which makes up a worldview. That's a philosophy in my view, my perspective. Whatever beliefs you have about those three things, those three domains, they're going to necessitate one another. So if I believe something, say, about ethics, let's say I think that there's objective truth, there's objective morals that you have to submit to, that also assumes that I have knowledge of those ethical principles or those morals. So, and by extension, metaphysical claims as well. That just has to do with what exists, what's real, what's not real. So everybody has some kind of worldview. But when we start asking the questions about those starting points of a worldview, those beginning commitments, ultimately only, I believe, the Christian theistic position, specifically the Christian theistic position, can give an account for, and what I mean by that is epistemic justification or a consistent, coherent, grounded account for the possibility of knowledge, the possibility of metaphysics, and the possibility of ethics in some coherent scheme. Really, Christianity checks all those boxes. And like Tim said, with the other positions, the other worldviews that are out there, even though they might have some overlap, at some point, they're going to have a fundamental contradiction that can be demonstrated that makes those systems not coherent, not cohesive, and not a grounding for knowledge. So I'm not saying that the people in those positions don't have knowledge claims or belief claims. I'm saying that they don't have a consistent account of that knowledge.
Okay. Now, so let's just stick with you, Jay, because I want to ask you, this is something I've seen you touch on quite a bit in your debates. And then Tim, of course, I want to hear your input, but you mentioned, you brought up the Trinity, and I was thinking about a question about the Trinity, because I've seen quite a few people, including I think one or two Muslims with you, that claim that the Trinity is a form of polytheism in itself. And I know in John's gospel is where Jesus makes a few definitive statements about the singularity between he and the Father. They're one and the same. But prior to that, I know why some of Jesus's references to God the Father being in third person is confusing to people. And then we have the whole concept of the Holy Ghost, and deeper reasoning and logic for this was never taught very well to me when I was in school. I know this because I'm getting closer to the day that I have to be able to explain it to my daughter, and I'm not the type to accept that's just the way it is as an answer. So start with you, because I know that you've done a lot on this. Talk about the Trinity and how it actually makes sense.
Yeah, two things to say to that. I'll try to make it as quick as I can. The first thing to say is that the word monotheism, although I don't necessarily have a problem with it, depending upon what a person means, this is actually a really late term. The actual phrase mono, this is actually not used until the 1600s. If we go back to the teachings of the church fathers, who I believe accurately reflect what the scriptures teach, they use the term the one God, referring to the person of the Father. And the reason I stress that is not to be obtuse, but that in a lot of debates now with Muslims, and in fact, the last month or two, we've had a lot of Jews come to debate, and the arguments end up being the same, is that we always end up trying to stress and explain that Christianity is not this new thing. I mean, there's elements of it that are new, but you'll notice as you read through the Gospels, it's not just the Gospel of John, but Jesus is always really interested in demonstrating that everything he's teaching is consistent with the Torah. And not just the Torah, obviously, but also the prophets, the writings, the historical books. So what we have here is actually an Old Testament Trinitarianism that is absolutely essential to argue, especially when it comes to Muslims, because their whole case is that Jesus, Paul, later people, church fathers, Constantine, and they invented Trinity. No, they didn't invent the Trinity. And that's why it's so crucial. If you go watch my debate with Daniel Hakikachu, my opening statement is called the Jewish Trinity, because it's absolutely essential to show that there's no disparity whatsoever between what Jesus teaches about his relationship to the Father and to the Spirit and what is in literally dozens of texts in the Torah and the prophets, the Psalms, etc. I could go through many of them if you want. Just for example, when we look at the book of Genesis, we see Abraham eating and meeting face to face with the Lord. And if you read John chapters 5-9, Jesus makes it very clear over and over to the Pharisees that he's the one eating with Abraham. He's the one on the mountain with Moses in Exodus, meeting face to face. So many other passages, Exodus 31, Exodus 33, explicitly refer to the person and the deity of the Holy Spirit. That's not the only example. It's just one of many. The Psalms refers to the person of the Father over and over. The angel messenger, the Son, the messenger of the covenant, as he's called in many passages, and to the personal Holy Spirit. So when Jesus talks about the person of the Spirit in John 14-17, he's not inventing a new thing. It's all throughout the Old Testament when we're really fluent in those passages and those texts. So to go back to your point there about the notion of monotheism, we believe that everything Jesus is teaching is absolutely perfectly consistent with monotheism, because the word God, this is really important, especially when you're debating with Muslims or people like that. Muslims assume that the word God only has one referent, that it only picks out divinity proper or the divine essence. For us, even in scriptures, the word God can have many references. It can pick out the person of the Father. It can pick out the divine essence. It can pick out divine attributes or actions, what we call in the East energies. It can pick out even non-divine things that are created, like angels and humans. I have said ye are gods. So God is not a strict single referent term. And this is very important because, again, for us, you can have monotheism, believing that the God the Father is God by identity, but that he generates a son to whom he communicates that singular divine essence. And so it's not polytheism, because there's only one God proper, God the Father, one divine nature, and also a very important doctrine called perichoresis, which is that the divine persons indwell one another. So these are three ways that we know that there's not three gods, there's not many gods, there's only one God, but that one God is trihypostatic or tripersonal because he's revealed that way.
That's I'm gonna have to listen to that one a couple of times. That's incredible. That's a good way of Tim. What do you say about that? I'd love to hear this. Tim, you there? Did we lose Tim?
I got kicked off for a second. Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go. Okay, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, everything I heard Jay say, I absolutely believe is similar between our traditions or identical. I don't think there's anything that's even distinguishable. Jay's Orthodox. I'm Catholic, of course. I would just say on a more basic level, the atheist will say to the Christian, three persons, one substance. What does this really mean? The word is homoousios. This means same substance, one substance, even though there are three persons in the Trinity. There's nothing contrary to reason. By this, we mean the principle of the excluded middle, the principle of non-contradiction that is violated or run foul of by the concept of homoousios, meaning one single substance, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So there's no contradiction there. All that the atheist or the agnostic tends to run foul of is a failure of imagination, because we can't conceive of another corporeal embodied person, a human being, or like an angel, a non-corporeal person that is homoousios with three persons. But all we say in the Thomistic terminology is that these persons are conceptually separable, and more than that, but except that doesn't mean that they have to be ontologically divisible one from another. So there are lots of examples that have been famously given in this regard. Separability, ontological separability.
Hold on, Tim. I think we lost you again. Tim?
He might do better if he just went to audio, because if you got a hotel Wi-Fi, the video might be a little much for the pipes.
Could be. Tim, you hear us? Maybe just hold on. When we get him back, I'll tell him to drop the video. All right. Well, let's see. He'll come back in here. This is the next question I have, because
could I real quick make one point about
please,
the analogies that Tim's talking about?
Yes.
Before you move on, real quick. A lot of times atheists, agnostics, that's what I was addressing the Muslim objection of monotheism, but like Tim's saying, even in the created order, and I'm not equating God to the created order, but even amongst created things, we can find things that have multiplicity and unity in them. And there's nothing inherently contradictory about that. And even in mathematics, we can see situations where something can be both 3 and 1, even perhaps in an equal sense, without it being irrational or incoherent. I mean, just real quickly, 1 to the third power, 1 times 1 times 1, and even just the numeral 3. I mean, is this one thing or is this 3 things? Well, it's both at the same time. So there's nothing irrational about the triad or the Trinity.
Okay, that makes the visual actually help, to be honest. So then the next question, and the reason why I asked about the Trinity is because we just came off of that first question about, whittling down 10,000 world religions to one, and to be able to do away with polytheist religions. Where does the Trinity fall within the idea of polytheism? Because that's something that I would say the average churchgoer would probably have a little bit of a hard time actually putting into articulate terms there. But the question I have now is, and I don't know if Tim, are you there yet? Okay, maybe he should also get inside too. But here's the next thing I would like to revisit. I actually want to do this with you, Jay, in Christmas, but it's really germane to our discussion tonight. And that is when we're talking about asking the question, why Christianity, and more specifically then, why Jesus? Christmas, for example, the critics of the faith would say, Well, Christianity is merely a repository for recycled myths of much older traditions, where there are 12 disciples and virgin births, and December 25th birthdays, and there's resurrections and deaths and sacrifice and all that stuff. Now, I don't know anybody can publish anything, and I think that anybody can interpret things wrong, either out of malice or ignorance. But when you are faced with this question, how do you confidently establish Christianity's uniqueness?
Me or Tim? Is Tim back?
Tim, are you there? Tim? I don't know. Oh, it says 3 participants, but I don't know if they'll... I don't know. Tim, you hear us? Okay, anyway. Go ahead. Did you get that question?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of different, there's 2 things about that objection, I would say. First is, just because there's similarities amongst religions, it doesn't follow from that necessarily that this one or that one borrowed, even if it's later in time. We don't necessarily know, because a lot of ancient and even medieval history, there's a lot that we don't know. And so we don't know where this or that source might have gotten these ideas from. In fact, if you go back to the early church writings, they're even debating amongst the church fathers whether or not Plato was in fact influenced by maybe reading Moses or Isaiah. So we just oftentimes, especially amongst academics and people who are not believers, they just assume that anything that happens in the Christian sphere or in the writings of the prophets or whatever, it had to be ripped off from pagan sources. Well, we don't know that, right? It could be the other way around. And in fact, perhaps Moses influenced Egyptian philosophy and theology. Perhaps when Jacob was in Egypt, he influenced the Egyptians. It's just people just have a lot of assumptions that they'd never actually questioned. But beyond that, it's not just a matter of, say, picking out one similarity, which would, again, also be a fallacy, to say that, well, because there's this similarity of a virgin birth here, and this other religion has a virgin birth, therefore they're the same religion, or therefore they have the common origins. We just don't know it. And it doesn't follow logically from similarity to there being common origin. And I would say, if you look at the messianic prophecies as a whole, of which there are many, there's not just 1 or 2, there's many, many, many messianic prophecies. That's a good way to see that, what the Old Testament, the prophets teach about the coming of the Messiah. They're very specific. They're very precise. There aren't 1 or 2, probably everybody's, Isaiah 53 or Psalm 22. There's way more messianic prophecies with much more precision that demonstrate inspiration beyond just, do you see what in other words, if you look at it holistically, it's a lot more to Christ being the Messiah and the messianic prophecies as a proof of inspiration than just something like, well, how would I know between this deity claiming, a virgin goddess versus that one over there? Well, Jesus is not just a virgin born person.
Oh.
He's also the fulfillment of tons and tons of very specific prophecies. Like Daniel 9, for example, it says that when the Messiah comes, the temple will be destroyed. You'll have an end to the sacrificial system of the Jews. You'll have the gospel being opened up to the Gentiles. Something that in Daniel's day would have seemed outlandish, outrageous, right? Because at the time of Daniel, they were going into Babylonian captivity. They didn't have a temple. So how's there going to be a Messiah who comes to end the temple worship? If we think about it in terms of Isaiah's day or Daniel's day, all these prophecies, they are just sort of like outlandish, and yet they came to pass.
Tim, are you with us? I just heard him pop in. Tim, you there? I told him to go straight audio. Yeah, that's okay. So that's an interesting way of getting around to that too, because I'll tell you, sometime around late November, December, it's going to be the same old thing. There's going to be however many people influencing the algorithm online, sharing those same Stephen Fry videos, talking about Mithras and all of the side by side to take away any kind of uniqueness to the Christmas season and whatnot. And I always wonder. I always look for any kind of a rebuttal to that. And
I can speak specifically to that. In the Bollingen series of the Joseph Campbell set, which is ironic because you would think, well, the Joseph Campbell Bollingen series, they're going to have this is a famous comparative religion series. You would think, well, they're going to assume the common origin roots of Jesus and the Mithras. There's actually a really good essay in the one. I'll have to find the actual exact reference, but there's a really good essay contrasting the Mithras with Christianity. And so what happens is that there's a superficial similarity between certain rituals or rites, and people then assume, again, because of superficial similarity, common origin or common teaching or common theology. There's way more that distinguishes the teaching of Christianity, again, out of the Hebrew prophets from the teaching of the Mithras that, again, has nothing to do with like what Mithraism is. And the article, the reason I'm pointing to that article is that even in a comparative religion, Carl Jungian, Joseph Campbell, syncretist type of publication, they're putting out articles saying this idea that Christianity borrowed from Mithraism is like an old higher critical thing, and it's been discarded. So even academics don't believe this anymore.
Okay. And Tim, did you get any of that? I saw you bounced in the middle of that comment.
Yeah, it's a great comment. I mean, they have to make up their mind. Even like Gandhi famously said that, Christianity is so unique that if he'd ever met a Christian that actually followed the teachings of Jesus, he'd become one. So agnostics and atheists are typically on both sides of the question, always saying on the one hand, if it gets close to Christmas, that it's an utterly derivative religion, what Jay was responding to. And on the other hand, they acknowledge famously how Christian asceticism, martyrdom, monasticism, particularly the Christian sexual ethic, is sui generis in the world. It's utterly its own. So sure, there are accidental likenesses. Jay did a great job knocking a lot of those down. But virgin birth, that this is common to a lot of the world religions. That doesn't mean it's fake. I mean, every other man in the world tends to wear pants to work. That doesn't mean that all the men have the same personality as I do. So those are very, very superficial, accidental similitudes with Christianity. And yet the same atheist or agnostic, or, I don't know, guy writing a sitcom for NBC will make jokes about how unique the impositions, the moral impositions of Christianity are, particularly the sexual ones. Richard Dawkins will say, God's not petty enough. He'll use that term, petty, to care about the moral impositions on the sex life, the loin issues of Christianity. And Christianity is so weird because it stands alone there. Well, again, martyrdom is unique to Christianity. It's utterly different from the kind of thing that Muslims call martyrdom. Monasticism is utterly unique to Christianity out of the great Desert Fathers tradition. And when it comes to the ideas that Jesus is actually teaching in his famous teachings on the Sermon on the Mount, it's an utterly unique world religion.
You're talking about martyrdom there, and the first thing I went to from that point is a question that you and I discussed, a topic you and I discussed just last week that I would actually like to throw over to Jay right now, because I jumped from martyrdom to miracles and even relics. Now, Jay, in the very, very brief exchange you and I had off air, I asked you about relics, and you said you did acknowledge relics and whatnot, but it's very, very important not to have that become the proof of a faith, or the proof of Christianity in particular. Can you expand? Because that was a very, very short exchange we had. Can you expand on where miracles and relics do live inside of a healthy balance with the question of faith? Because I'll tell you, for people like me, learning about some of these events, learning about something like the Shroud of Turin or something like that, it does inspire a lot of intrigue that has brought people to the faith, that's for sure. But like you said before, it shouldn't be the proof of the faith. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, what I meant to say was that maybe in a limited sense, we could say relics are, quote, proofs I would say maybe confirmations. I think the New Testament uses the terminology of
Okay.
the signs that accompany, Christ and his apostles are confirmations of the faith. The only reason I would say not strict proof is that, Jesus warns even in the Gospels that those who seek signs and wonders are an adulterous, wicked generation. So, in other words, there's never going to be some kind of like, uh, you know, object that will be like the ultimate proof, because like all other objects, they're always going to be debated. They're part of an interpretive scheme that we have for reading the world. So for example, I can show a million relics to an atheist. An
Yeah,
atheist is always going to interpret relics according to his worldview.
absolutely.
So I think the proofs in the strict sense of the way we use that word usually tend to be more so things like what we were arguing earlier about apologetics, or about the message. Does Jesus fulfill the messianic prophecies? Usually those are, I think, the stronger proofs. But in a limited sense, I think, yeah, we could say that the existence of relics is in part an attestation to the historical reality of these people, their time, their events. And I don't mean to say they're just that. In the Orthodox view, we believe that they are charged with the divine energy. So we think that relics really do have a divine power in them, as do the icons and the holy images. So they're very important. I was just using proof in our discussion in a stricter, more logical sense. But also, by the way, the essay critiquing this whole claim of Mithraism and Christianity, it's in volume 2 of the Eranos yearbook, which is actually a really good book. But if you want that, let me see if I can get it right. Papers from the Eranos yearbook, edited by Joseph Campbell. There's a guy who wrote a critique, basically just refuting the whole idea that Christianity is Mithraism.
Okay, wonderful. We got that on the screen for anybody. I'll probably go check it out myself, especially as in the lead up to the holidays. Tim, we just did a whole show on the Shroud last week and whatnot. But is there anything that Jay just said right there you want to comment on before we get to the next question?
Jay referred to it. Yeah, St. Paul says in inerrant scripture that those young of faith will seek signs and wonders. And I think that's consistent with experience. Lots of people that are transferring over to the faith will be rightly ordered toward the faith in a more compelling way by such signs and wonders. And there's nothing wrong with that. Once you've been there for a while, then you're going to, what we call the motives of credibility in Catholicism, these are going to be more compelling to you in a lasting way, and especially the person of Christ and his both the superficial and the very hidden, profound ways that he is the absolute fulfillment of the Old Testament. That is more compelling to people who are less young of faith, according to St. Paul in the Bible. But no, of course, I mean, I believe in Aristotelian hylomorphism. So it shouldn't surprise folks who are truly Christian. It always tends to surprise Protestant Christians that there is something like a Legend of Zelda magical objects. There aren't many of them, but why wouldn't there be? If Jesus was flesh and blood in his 33 years on earth, then things like the Shroud of Turin ought not to be that surprising to a believing Christian. And to the agnostics and atheists out there who find them unbelievable, well, science, who's the demigod, which has replaced Christianity or any other religions in their hearts, it cannot account for them. So that's perfectly healthy. It's perfectly salubrious. It just shouldn't be, like Jay said, it shouldn't be the entire account of faith that one renders on Judgment Day.
Okay, very valid stuff there. You had mentioned, but staying with you just for a second, what was that Gandhi quote that you had said before about the uniqueness of Christianity? If anybody actually held true to them, he'd be a Christian himself, was it?
Yeah, it's famous kind of paragraph. The last line of it's what often gets quoted, which is, if I ever met a good Christian, I would become one myself. But the paragraph which precedes it is him giving an account of the absolute uniqueness and excellence of Jesus. Gandhi's just making the somewhat cynical point that few Christians can live up to the mark of the God man, which I don't know why that surprises him much.
Well, see, there, and this is something where another one I can't wait to hear both of you comment on. The audience member that wrote into me spent a good portion of the email actually expressing a good amount of anger, not in a wild, irrational way. It was directed toward organized religion as a whole. But of course, knowing what side of the tracks I'm on right now, there's that pointedly toward Christianity as well. And they brought up the whole convert or die mentality at the heart of many conflicts throughout history. And in Christianity's case, people will use at least loose references to the Crusades, the Inquisition, the conquering of the Americas, or even modern sexual and satanic ritual abuse stories that we are always being uncovered now as a reason to challenge the authenticity of the faith itself. How do you handle that question, both of you guys? And Jay, we'll start with you because I'm sure you both get it a lot.
I think all institutions, even, we view the church as a theanthropic, meaning human and divine institution. So it has a human element, it has a divine element as well. All institutions, even one that's theanthropic, because of the human side, has the potentiality for state influence, non-state actors to send in people, try to subvert it, try to take it over, try to control it. For example, we see this in the history of church many times in the Icon Council in the 7th century. The locus of attack was largely the state trying to turn the church into an iconoclastic entity. You go back to the Arian crisis. Some of the emperors were also Arian or semi-Arian. They wanted to turn the church into an institution that, as we talked about earlier, didn't believe in the Trinity. This actually allowed the state to really control it, or that was their motivation, their move, their desire. So this is something that is susceptible. I think any institution is susceptible to that kind of influence, subversion, infiltration, control, or attempted control. But we wouldn't say that the entirety of the church. I think we would have different accounts between Tim and I here at this point. But for the Orthodox perspective, we wouldn't think that the entirety of the bishops in the world could be totally sold on some lie or totally co-opted, totally controlled. We would say there's always going to be, valid, ordained, truly believing Orthodox bishops, even if there was a bad situation where, like in the Arian crisis in the 4th century, even the majority of the empire, even the majority of the bishops at some points were Arian or semi-Arian. By that, I mean they didn't believe in the correct doctrine of the Trinity. So you can even be in the minority, but we still would confess that the gates of hell won't prevail against the church. You're always going to have, faithful bishops that preserve and hand on the truth and the true faith. So that's, I think, one side of this. And then beyond that, you and I have talked, I think, about, Gladio and different operations and the CIA and foreign governments, secret societies, Freemasonry. All of these entities have at various times desired to co-opt Christianity, infiltrate it, destroy it. NGOs, foundations, liberalize it. Rockefellers, others, they want to turn it into this, human institution, a social justice entity, American soft power. I mean, all of these are examples of attempts to co-opt Christianity and the church into basically engines of other entities, other power blocks for the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said before in the opening, and that's one of the things that brought me back to being interested in going to church and filling in all these gaps is that starting to recognize a lot of those operations and wondering why Christianity was such an existential threat to the plans that certain people have for the world, and even during, just to play, play both sides of this out here too. Even during my own spiritual low points, I would have never expected war or violence to be absent in people just because they're religious. For example, there's no rival to the brutality of communist regimes of the 20th century alone. There's no rival to what they were doing to people by the hundreds of millions. And many times just because they were religious and godlessness was the status quo. Tim, what do you have on this?
Well, it came up very early. I think the fourth
century, 4th or 5th century. It was Gregory the Great, I believe, that ordered Christians who were as a kind of violent side errand in the Fourth Crusade. Maybe my time's messed up. There are Christians that were forcing baptism upon Jews, and Gregory the Great said, "You only do this through sweetness of preaching, never through the force of the sword," which had already been Christian doctrine, has always been a Christian doctrine since. So you don't judge a religion by the most errant instances of the religionists. There's never ever been contradiction on this score. Christianity has always been a religion whereupon fides et ratio walk hand in hand. Faith and reason go together. And this is why forcible conversion has always been condemned loudly, volubly by the popes. If one goes and reads the Regensburg Address by Pope Benedict XVI, he provides an excellent example of the fact that forcible conversion, which atheists love pointing at, is a uniquely Muslim phenomenon in the 7th and 8th and 9th centuries. As soon as, for example, Muhammad came into power after the Hijrah with his uncle Ali, as soon as they were popular, they started saying forcible conversion is a good thing. Whereas before the Hijrah, the flight from Mecca to Medina, they taught strictly forcible conversion isn't a good thing. This has something to do with the historical happenstance of being initially in the minority and being in Medina in the majority. Christianity, on the other hand, has always spoken with one voice that this is bad. Christianity is a non-voluntarist, anti-nominalist religion. That means that God cannot violate the principle of contradiction, unlike what the Muslims believe. And stemming from this view, the idea that God will always act sun logos, with logos. Jesus is the logos man himself, will never order us to act violently or against reason. And that's why, for example, it doesn't matter what Christian tradition we're talking about, even Protestant, Orthodox, or Catholic, a baptism and a confirmation, two of the sacraments, are not valid if they were forced upon an adult. So this is simply an empty set of a critique of Christianity. Level it fine at Islam, but it's always been held in Christianity that forcible conversion is not even a bona fide conversion. And there's never been a religious war fought in the name of religious conversion. The Crusades were holy wars fought over relics and lands that had been taken largely in the Orthodox Christian part of the world forcibly by violent Islam. Remember, Muhammad was a warlord. He fought 79 battles in his life. 78 of them were offensive, according to Robert Spencer. And this checks out in other documents I've cross-referenced it with. So Christianity, as it implemented the Crusades, was not attempting to convert the non-believer, whether Jews or Muslims. This simply is a, sophomoric apprehension of what the Crusades were about. They were not about converting non-believers. They were about retaking what's rightfully ours.
That right there is something I've been actually reading a lot about myself. I'd love to have conversations like this about the Crusades with you guys. Either or of you. I would also like to talk about the Inquisition one day. There's a lot about that. I don't know too much about. I know that in this email that I received over the last couple of weeks that became the source material for tonight's show, this particular audience member was also pretty bitter about what he knew about 19th century and early 20th century Native American boarding schools. Because of course he had some family that was one native nation or another, that there was essentially forced conversions here in the United States during the 19th and early 20th century in Native American boarding schools. Now I don't know if that is just if that's certain denominations or whatever the hell else going on there, but do you know of any denouncements of stuff like that? Was it Catholic? Was it Orthodox? Was it Protestant? He brought that up specifically, so I wouldn't want to leave that out.
Well, this came up like 4 years ago. In Canada, there's a really funny relationship, a state relationship, similar to the German relationship with the church, where it's really an act of statism to force Catholic schools or Christian schools as a kind of public education. And that's what you have in certain parts of Canada and in Germany. There's a really odd mesalliance between the church and the state there, one that America's always been circumspect about. So the problems that folks were reacting to, that I think your emailer is reacting to from 4 years ago into Canada, that was a statism issue rather than a Catholic issue. Like I say, roundly and flatly, the church has always condemned forced conversions, and I guess you would have to deal with Catholicism and Islam separately from the prospect of Catholicism and Judaism. When we get into the Spanish Inquisition, once again, this is not any more forced conversion of the infidel, the Jew in this case, any more than it was forced conversion of the Muslim in the Crusades. In the Crusades, it was largely taking back what is rightfully Christianity's, helping Eastern Christianity take it back. And of course, there were divergent Christian parties that were acting badly in war. This is just a fact of life, collateral damage, etc. Mainly restricted to the Fourth Crusade, but the Pope was quick to chasten such errant Christians. But again, it was never about forcible conversion. With regard to the Spanish Inquisition, in a word, this was expulsions of how to say it. There were expulsions of Jews from Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, and this is because subversives are expelled from countries, but that doesn't mean that they've been forcibly converted. And by the way, there are 108 other instances of forcible conversion of practitioners of Judaism for subversion. And I'll just say this:
wait, forcible conversion or expulsion? Expulsion, you mean?
Expulsion, forcible expulsion, not forcible conversion. And I would just close with the idea that if I'm eating out at 109 restaurants in a row and I keep getting kicked out of those restaurants for subversive behavior, lewd behavior, lascivious behavior, whatever it is, that's probably not 109 restaurants' fault. It's probably mine. That's a longer conversation.
Yeah, it is. It is a very long conversation. And I would like to actually talk about the Inquisition one day, because I haven't gotten into it. Jay, there was a lot to unpack there. Anything that's came up with you that you want to add to?
Yeah, for people that are interested in a longer treatment of the medieval period, I did a talk from a big fat scholarly book that I read some years back. He's an Anglican historian and scholar, but he's actually really good on the Middle Ages. His name is Malcolm Lambert, and did a summary of his 600-page book. You can find that on my channel, where I go through his take on the Middle Ages, particularly the rise of what's called the Holy Office of the Inquisition. And a lot of people misunderstand this. There's also another secular historian, his name's Henry Common, and he wrote a book pointing out that all of the sort of crazy stories of like millions of women being burned in the Middle Ages it's all made up. It's all nonsense. The church's Inquisition at the max perhaps killed a few thousand people, according to Common, again, Henry Common, a secular scholar. The Spanish Inquisition, which was actually a state institution, did a lot more of that kind of stuff. But you have to keep in mind that heresy and these kinds of errors are not just sort of random happenstance or just sort of like, who cares what somebody thinks about the person of Christ. In the Middle Ages, when you have a society or civilization that is largely Christian, whether Eastern or Western, if you have groups that are promoting really wild, radical positions, they're not just intellectual errors. They can also upset the whole social order. The greatest example of this is the medieval sect of the Cathari, who were essentially Gnostics. And Malcolm Lambert in that book covers the Cathari extensively. They actually were fairly militant, which is odd because usually Gnostic groups aren't like militant, but the Cathar actually ended up getting like multiple castles and fortresses. And so they became like a real threat to the existing Christian structure. And again, there might be multiple reasons why. And even Lambert notes this, like maybe, yeah, there's a lot of corruption in the church. And when there's a lot of corruption, opulence, decadence in the church, that provides a sort of justification. I'm not saying it was right to become a Gnostic, but that's what impels the people to say, oh, well, I guess I'm going to go over to this sect over here because these people are so corrupt. So corruption ends up breeding a lot of this social revolution that heresy promotes. That's why kings had these laws and rules against heresy. It wasn't just, like every hippie DMT bro says, we want to control this dude. I mean, it's much more than that. It's a lot more sophisticated than that. But I'll also say that people don't know that the techniques of the Holy Office and canon law in the West, the way that they had juridical defense and procedure for the rights of the accused, a lot of the laws and the things that we have on the books in America, they actually come out of church law, canon law, East and West, and even the Holy Office of the Inquisition. So the people misunderstand this due to atheist propaganda, as if the church was burning millions of witches. First of all, there weren't millions of witches to burn in the Middle Ages, right? But
Right.
like it's not as extreme as they say, and it was all about good order in society in a majority Christian society, and it only makes sense for any society that's majority Christian to have Christian laws and Christian rules. As any majority Buddhist, Shinto, they're going to have laws that reflect their worldview, their beliefs. So, and as Tim said, I mean, the Crusades, if you study the Crusades, they're not primarily motivated by pure power and forced conversion. I've never even heard that it was about forced conversion. That's a bizarre atheist argument I've never heard.
It is.
It was defensive because you had, like Tim said, the rise of this new sect of Muhammad that was threatening already established Christian lands, and so it was much more of a defensive move. I think overall, the people in the East needed the help from the West. There were bad actors, as Tim said. I think some of the French kings and crusaders were just pillagers. They were adventurers out for loot, for booty. So there was a lot of that going on. The King of France ended up falling out eventually, even with the Pope, if I recall, the Council of Vienne, this kind of stuff. So it's more complex than good guy, bad guy. But one thing I would say, the only one place I disagree with Tim is this, that from the Orthodox perspective, we think there's a big shift in the 11th century as to the papacy sort of taking on a lot of new claims and powers, which becomes one of the factors as to why there's crusades. I concede, and I totally agree with Tim, that largely it's defensive, but there is also, we believe, this rise of new military monastic orders, which is unheard of. There is a rise, in our view, on the papacy in the 11th century, the Gregorian reform, seeking a lot of new geopolitical power, and that's something that the Orthodox position would disagree with. Otherwise, everything Tim said was correct.
Okay. Tim, anything you got on that before I move on? I have one. I know you're limited. You're on vacation right now, but I have one more big question to ask both of you guys. But if you have anything to say with Jay's last comment, go right ahead.
Yeah, well, getting into the nature of the papacy is obviously one of the few really key issues dividing the East and the West. There's a long response that accommodates Jay's last remark, but yeah, we should do that soon, maybe on the show or something.
I will listen. Whatever the hell happens, I'd love to. If that's something you guys ever do together, because I know you've done streams on your own. Just hey, this is just like volume 1 of a couple of calls that we do. I still would like to have a Protestant on with us one time as well, but I'd love to hear you guys talk about stuff like that and just like weigh it out. But Jay, real quick, you mentioned Shintoism and Buddhism. That's popped up a little bit. Have you ever debated a Shintoist before?
No, I mean, I think typically Far Eastern religions don't debate. I mean, I'm not saying it's never possible, but they don't usually engage in sort of rational discourse based on truth or falsehood, because kind of underlying most Far Eastern religions is that logic and duality and all this stuff is something that you're supposed to transcend. So they don't really, I mean, it kind of, debate kind of assumes the laws of logic, kind of assumes objectivity, and a lot of Far Eastern religions are kind of not really based on that. So I think one time a Buddhist guy called in and we debated for maybe 20 minutes, but they're not really missionary proselytizing faiths, so they don't really do that.
Okay. Well, then here's a question I have for both of you guys, because again, I just wanted to test the waters in a number of different places, and I'll find other questions to ask next time. But this may actually go back and as an offshoot of the why not many gods question, but perhaps not. There's a power to be tapped into here on this earth, no doubt about it. We are certainly conduits of that power, I believe, and some people learn to hone it and understand it better than others. And in past episodes in which we were discussing topics like exorcism, I noted with some guests that, demons have been cast out of people for thousands of years, even before Christ. Human will has galvanized in ritualistic ways for both good and bad purposes since before the birth of Christ as well. So, it's just think of some of his myth and legend, and others just like long-standing tradition. So I want to ask you guys. I guess we'll start with Jay. How does this relate to the question about that people usually have, or the statements they usually have about plurality? This idea that there's more than one way to skin a cat. Especially when it comes to exorcism and the spiritual world, or even just manifestation when it comes to human will and applying it there. A lot of that predates Christianity, and some would say that there's some kind of an unseen mechanics to the universe over here that we can tap into, whether or not we are invoking the name of Christ. So what do you say to that? Is that all inherently evil because it was established prior to Christ's birth, or I don't know, just run away with that one a little bit.
I mean, no, and that wouldn't really negate Christianity, because remember what I claimed at the beginning. I was arguing that the religion of the Old Testament is actually Christianity. Even though the name's not there, you have a tri-hypostatic deity revealed in the Torah and in the prophets. We believe, as Jesus says, John 5-9, that Moses, Abraham, they knew they were worshiping the Son of God. They knew him face to face. So this wasn't a mysterious, different religion or anything like that. It was proto-Christianity. Christianity really just confirms and fulfills what was already there. So there's not a different religion back then. And the account that we would have of the other world religions out there, even back before the time of Christ, I mean, we think the New Testament actually discusses this, right? So, for example, a lot of the Eastern Church Fathers teach that when Christ died, he descended into Hades, the realm of the dead, and that the gospel was preached there to them. Peter says this, St. Cyril of Alexandria, many church fathers, John of Damascus, expound upon what it means for Christ to commit or to engage in what we call the harrowing of Hades, which is really to destroy the power of death in his descent to Hades, to preach the gospel to those who had died, who were righteous. We don't exactly know who was righteous and who wasn't. We know that Paul says in Romans 2 that the people who die without law will be judged without law. That doesn't mean they're necessarily automatically saved. We just don't know that. God doesn't tell us the destiny of those people. But we could definitely agree and say that, I mean, there are angels, we would say, that help govern the universe. There's angels that are all over the world and all over time. And so certainly you could have, even amongst pagans, angelic visitors helping or even exorcising spirits. That's possible. But none of that, even if we admitted that or conceded that, it wouldn't negate the position that we have as Christians that it's still the one true faith, the one true religion. We believe that there are truths everywhere, but that specifically divine revelation comes through the Hebrew prophets, through the person of Christ, and it's found in the church. So we wouldn't say that even divine revelation can be restricted to the church, but you can have miracles, you can have these kinds of manifestations even outside of it, or even in the other religions. That doesn't make the religions true. it's that it's good in spite of the religion, because human nature is good, creation is good, the world is good. We believe in what's called the Logos Spermaticos. This is the teaching of the early church fathers, that the seeds of Christ are everywhere, even amongst pagans, because although their religion is false, it doesn't mean everything they believe or that their nature is bad or false, right? So creation is good. Evil is a privation or a defect. It's not an actual thing. And so this might sound a little weird to a Catholic, but in the Orthodox view, we think actually grace is natural to man. I'm not saying that grace is nature, but we believe that, as St. Maximus says, there's nothing more natural to man than to come to God, and to, as Paul says, to the pagans, the word is near you, even in your heart. So it's natural to man to believe in God if he's following through with his Edenic nature. Now, not everybody does that because we are fallen, but no, there's still truths out there without the religions as a whole being true.
Okay. So Tim, take that away. You know, there's that. Go ahead.
Yeah, grace builds upon nature, and so it doesn't sound funny at all to hear that. Actually, it's one of the condemned. It's a condemned heresy in the Roman Catholic Church to say that God is not knowable through the reason alone. We can't know about God without articles of faith and without supernatural scripture and things like that. But grace builds upon nature, and like Jay said, you know, through man's Edenic nature, when we're acting in concomitance with our grace, which is not like an alien. It's alien insofar as it's a gift from God, but it builds upon our human nature because our human nature was good. Creation was good. I would say in regard to exorcism, this is a very interesting proposition, and this came up not long ago as an aside to my show. So what Christians believe, and again, I think Protestants are the same as Catholics or Orthodox on this, is that all of the false religions, particularly the polytheistic religions, are worshiping false gods, and they're lowercase g gods, as I discussed in the opening point, and they're actually demons. So a lot of them have names that will be familiar to the reader of the Old Testament. I mean, like Baal and Beelzebub and things like that are names that are synonymous with Satan. Demons often give false names in Roman Catholic exorcisms for who they are. They have a lot of different identities. So a lot of the world faiths that are associated with possession are actually describing a real phenomenon, some demon possessing some human being. And this did happen even before Jesus, even before, ostensibly before the time of the Old Testament. These are demons in the pagan world. Now, in terms of the efficacy of the major or minor rite exorcism, I'm very skeptical that it would have worked and I believe exactly what Jay said about the reality of the Trinity, even in the times of the Old Testament. We're of one mind on that. But I mean, it's a really interesting proposition. There's not efficacy to exorcism unless it's done in the power of Jesus. That's fundamental. It's Jesus. It's done under the person and the name of Christ. So while folks could have been possessed before, they couldn't have been exorcised without the power of Jesus. I think that was the specific call of the question, right?
That was an example, because I was thinking about this. Like, for example, Zoroastrianism. That is that originates to 6th or 7th century BCE. Is that that's older than Judaism, right? Right, guys?
Yeah, I mean, so Zoroastrianism, atheists will claim that it's a monotheism.
But the reason why I asked about just getting confirmation on how old it was is because I think it's older than Judaism, and I remember, in my research for one of the shows that I did on any kind of ritual, spiritual, rituals, rites, and exorcisms, things like that, that Zoroastrianism did have exorcism, that they did drive out demons to restore spiritual balance. So you're saying that it could not have happened back then because they weren't saved, or were they just chasing out demons with demons? What do you think what could have been?
One of the common things in Roman Catholic exorcisms with energumon, people who've been possessed, is they'll experience significantly worse manifestations when they're trying to take deeper steps into the faith. And if they stop praying, praying the office or praying the rosary or receiving daily communion or something like that, the demons will actually leave them alone a lot more. And this is a tremendously powerful disincentivization for folks that are maybe superficial of faith before going deeper into the faith. The reason I say this is because I think Zoroastrianism is even older than that, but someone maybe get a date on it. But it is. I do believe the primordial form is older than Judaism without looking. I don't buy that it's a veritable form of monotheism. So that's a sort of petty point, but I would say that if there were practitioners of Zoroaster or whatever who claimed that this person's demonically possessed and we can help him, that's a very difficult thing, even in veritable, Christian practitioners of exorcism, like, priests and bishops of the Catholic or Orthodox Church who do this with the real power of Jesus. It's not always clear. This is something I've been at a few minor rite exorcisms over the last few years. It's not clear whether or not the demon has been completely exorcised. So the claims that Zoroastrian might make to having an efficacious exorcism, while I'm fully willing to believe that they could have been possessed 3,000 years ago, the claims are more tenuous that they've had an efficacious full exorcism. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, Jay.
I'd like to make a point too.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
I'm not sure what, and I'm not trying to be contentious, but I'm not sure what you guys mean that Zoroastrianism is older than Judaism in this. Do you mean in the sense of like Judah or Mosaic law? I mean, Judaism is, I think, older than Zoroastrianism.
Oh, it is. I was just trying to.
Well, I mean, if you believe Genesis, I mean, true Judaism is present in the book of Genesis. Judah is, Jacob's son. So,
well, even if Zoroastrian is younger, they aren't in any way or shape, form, align with each other, or they're two different sets of beliefs.
Zoroastrianism is a dualistic religion, right? So it's like you have these two forces. I mean, maybe somebody would argue it's not. It's mono. I've always heard it was. I'm not an expert on it, but that it was dualism.
Okay. Well,
it is dualistic. The claims of atheists will always amount to that it's like 3,000 years plus old, and they always say that it's monotheistic, which it's really not.
Well, the only reason why I brought that up was just to have an example that was almost equally as old, but also outside of the Old Testament, New Testament.
But see, like what I was, getting at earlier with this notion of assumptions about the ancient world, there's so much that we don't know. I mean, when the Magi come, a lot of the tradition is that, right, the Magi were influenced by Zoroastrianism. And so, in other words, it's entirely possible that Zoroastrianism was influenced by Jewish prophets rather than the other way around. But you see, like, the assumption of unbelieving scholarship is always that the Old Testament, Christianity, these are all ripoffs of the other religions. They never assume even the possibility that the Hebrew prophets influenced Zoroaster or influenced Plato or anything like that. I see it's always the other way around.
Wonderful point. That's a great point right there. Thank you for that.
Yeah, even though I'm just looking at it on Encyclopedia Britannica now, and what Jay just said is evidenced in a plenary way here. The Christians, following a Jewish tradition, identified Zoroaster with Ezekiel, Nimrod, Seth, Balaam, and Baruch, even through the latter with Jesus Christ himself. On the other hand, is the presumed founder of astrology and magic. Zarathustra could be considered the arch heretic. The ancient Greeks saw in Zoroastrianism the archetype of the dualistic view of the world and human destiny. Zarathustra was supposed to have instructed Pythagoras in Babylon, and to have inspired Chaldean doctrines in astrology and magic. It is likely that Zoroastrianism, and this is as secular as the scholarship gets, that it influenced the development of Judaism and the birth of Christianity. The funny thing here is this cope that the atheists and secularists will always make, this move so that Zoroastrianism is like the original and fourth monotheism. They say it contains both monotheistic and dualistic features. That's not true. If you study it even a little, it's purely dualism. It likely influenced the other major Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And the coping element is in the way that they're defining monotheism. It's fully polytheistic.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing too, you'll notice, like we met earlier on, we were talking about the essay about Mithraism. A lot of atheists will actually repeat quote scholarship that's like 200 years old. So like this story that Christianity is a development out of Zoroastrianism, because Zoroastrianism taught spiritual evil. Judaism got that from Zoroastrianism. That's all like scholarship that was in vogue like in 1900. And what's funny about scholarship is that today's scholarship discards most of that. Like it's a never ending, like it's always changing. So for example, they used to say, oh, there was this mythical Q. Q was what influenced Mark to write the Gospel of Mark and all this stuff. That was in vogue for decades amongst academics to debunk the Bible and the New Testament. And what's weird is that if you look at scholarship today, like they don't even believe in Q. This has been discarded. So it's a never ending sort of all over the place thing with modern scholarship. And a lot of atheists, they're just sort of like repeating what was in vogue 100, 200 years ago.
Very, you guys, I can't thank you enough. Tim, is there anything you'd like to say as close to Jay's final comment over there? Because I'm going to wrap it up then, if not, and I can't wait to have you both back on. This has to like become like volume 1 of many, because I'm a novice still, and I got a lot of questions, and the audience generates a lot of questions too. That I feel that we really we took the task tonight in an interesting way. You got anything, Tim?
Well, I just apologize for my weak hotel internet connection. I was trying to say at one point something that's perfectly concomitant with the point Jay had just made about the cult of Mithra. There's a great quick video that you can find on YouTube, Archbishop Fulton Sheen debunking it to a very similar tune is what Jay was saying. The idea that Christianity is simply derivative of the cult of Mithra on YouTube. It's just Christianity and Other Religions is, I believe, what it's called. It's from Fulton Sheen's show that he used to have in the late 50s. It's really, really, really excellent. If you just type in Fulton Sheen, Other Christianity and Other Religions. I would just say, yeah, we should talk about this is a question of scale and scope. When we're talking atheist or agnostic, secularist caricatures of Christianity, I'm always gonna sound pretty much exactly like Jay, but we should do shows here because we're all friends on your show, Frank. Differences between these two truly ancient forms of Christianity, Catholicism and Orthodoxy, because a lot of people out there are like, well, in America are Protestant. Well, Protestantism is a 500-year-old religion. It's different when you have a Catholic and an Orthodox talking together. Both of our faith goes back all the way to Jesus 2,000 years ago. But there are real differences. They just don't tend to come up unless you get into the nitty gritty. But we should do that here on your show.
I'd love to. That sounds like a really great time to me. Jay, anything you want to say in closing? If not, I really can't thank you guys enough for your time.
No, it was great. Appreciate it. Great chat. Great insights from Tim. I mean, I'm always down to have a, charitable fun back and forth of, where we agree, where we disagree as well.
Okay. Well, I just double checked all the super chats. I wanted to make sure that there weren't any burning questions coming in from the audience. I don't see anything that was really directed at you guys. Just a lot of wonderful glowing reviews of the the conversation, and I look forward to volume 2. I hope you both have a great night. TimothyJGordon.com, Jay'sAnalysis.com. Those URLs are in the description of the episode. Thank you, boys.
Thank you, man.
Later. All right. Take care.